Michigan finishes one of the hottest teams in college football in 2024, but how's it look for 2025? We're going to break it all down for you here in this video, preview the schedule, and give you a very early projected record for the Wolverines. Michigan had one of the toughest schedules really in all of college football in 2024. I think that's a big reason why they had the type of season that they did have. You look at some of their opponents like Illinois. We thought that might be an easier game. That turned out to be a tough game. You look at Indiana, not expected to be a tough game, things like that. And we're going to break the schedule down for you and again show you all the new opponents, who they lost, who they added, all of that as we look at this 2025 schedule, which is, I'll go ahead and tell you, it's much easier. Here's the full schedule, and we'll start with the non-conference. So they'll play New Mexico, at Oklahoma, and Central Michigan. So Oklahoma, that's going to be a tough game, especially on the road, but not as tough as Texas last season. So I think that is a little bit easier. Again, the difference is the fact that they do have to play this game on the road. So that will be potentially a tricky game, probably a defensive battle. Oklahoma should have a very solid defense. So that should be a fun one there early in the season. How about the home and away here for Michigan? They've actually got 6 home games and 6 road games. So 6 and 6 here. New Mexico, Central Michigan, Wisconsin, Washington, Purdue, and Ohio State all at home. And then on the road, it's Oklahoma, Nebraska, USC, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Maryland. What's interesting here is the fact that they have 4 home games in the conference and 5 road games. Usually teams kind of schedule this where if they have the 4 home games and the 5 road games, they'll make their big non-conference game at home to kind of even that out. So you have 5 home, 5 away in terms of Power 4 opponents, but they're only going to have 4 Power 4 games at home, and they're going to have 6 Power 4 opponents. They'll be playing them on the road. So that's interesting when you look at the schedule. Again, you look at the teams and you look who they play, it's a very favorable schedule, but the fact that they do play 6 Power 4 teams on the road makes it maybe a little bit tougher than you might think. So how about the changes? So in the Big Ten, they lost Minnesota, Illinois, Oregon, and Indiana. Those were 4 of the top teams of the Big Ten. You look at, of course, Oregon. They were at the top. Indiana was right there with, close to being in the Big Ten championship game. Illinois was a surprise team. They had a great year last year. Even Minnesota was pretty good last year. They were in the top half of the Big Ten. So you lose 4 quality teams, 4 very good teams, and then they add Nebraska, Wisconsin, Purdue, and Maryland. So this is what you like to see if you're a Michigan fan. Wisconsin is reeling right now. Honestly, I don't think they're going to be great next year. Purdue's possibly going to be the worst team in the Big Ten again. So you've got those games. You got Maryland. They were not very good last year. No reason to expect them to really bounce back and have a great year this year. The toughest game they add, I think, is going to be that Nebraska game. Now, this is a program that's trending in the right direction, and that game is going to be on the road. But you would take this trade all day long. Again, 4 of the top teams in the Big Ten, you get rid of them, and then you add maybe only 1 decent opponent. That's a very favorable schedule in the Big Ten. So they'll play New Mexico week 1, August 30th. Then it's a quick road trip there at Oklahoma, September 6th. Going to be a big game for both teams. The loser of that game, could have a pretty rough season. The winner will have a great opportunity the rest of the way. You got Central Michigan on September 13th, and then it's at Nebraska on September 20th. So that new opponent, that's the tougher new opponent there in Nebraska, playing them early. You look at those first 4 games before the first bye week, not horrible, but there are 2 tough road tests, Oklahoma and Nebraska, and those are both games Michigan can win, but those are also, I would say, both games that they could potentially lose. So that first month is really, again, going to give us a good indication of what to expect from Michigan this next season, because after that, there's not a lot of really tough challenges. Again, there are games that they could lose, but not a lot of games where you're like, oh, Michigan's going to have a really hard time. No, I mean, they've got a good shot in the rest of these games, really all the games that they play. I wouldn't point to the schedule and say there's any game that Michigan will be a big underdog in, maybe a slight underdog in a couple of these games. They got Wisconsin on October 4th, and then it's at USC on October 11th. Going to have to travel out west. We'll see how that goes. Washington at home on October 18th. And then it's on the road at Michigan State October 25th and Purdue at home November 1st. A couple of tough road tests there with USC and Michigan State potentially. but just looking at the opponents that, in this 5-game stretch, Michigan should be better than all 5 of those teams. So that's not a horrible stretch. Then they get their second bye week, back-to-back road games, but against teams that will be more than likely near the bottom of the Big Ten, Northwestern and Maryland. Again, anytime you go back-to-back on the road, that could be a little bit of a challenge, but these are both teams that Michigan should be able to beat even on the road. And then you've got the game at the end of the season, November 29th, Ohio State. Ohio State's going to potentially be, in a little bit of a rebuilding year this year, and the game is at home, so Michigan, obviously we all know they're going to have a great shot to win that game. Look at what they've done the last few years. So that's a big game there at the end. But again, when I look at this schedule, I just don't see anything that really worries me if I'm a Michigan fan. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win all these games, but they're at least going to have a chance to win, a really good chance to win every game on this schedule. So it's very favorable. So let's see how it stacks up with the other teams in the Big Ten in terms of conference opponents. And you see right there, if you look at the winning percentage from last season, Michigan is at the very bottom. They have the easiest schedule in the Big Ten, again, based off of these teams' win percentages last season. 27-54, their opponents, just a 33% win percentage. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the easiest schedule this year, because there could be some teams that are better than we think, that have a big bounce back from last year, like Nebraska, for example. Maybe USC bounces back and they're closer to the top. So there are some things that can happen to make this schedule a little bit tougher. But I think regardless, Michigan definitely is going to have one of the easier schedules, if not the easiest schedule in conference play in the Big Ten. Before we get to the projected record for Michigan, just a quick reminder that memberships are now available on the channel. You can get early access to videos like this and much more. Check it out. Become a member today. Given the easier schedule for Michigan in 2025, you would expect their record projection to go up. You would expect this team to have a better record in 2025. So what will that projection be? Before we get to that, let's look back at the projections from the last 4 seasons. As you can see, again, this was with our projection formula. This was never a prediction. I didn't give predictions here. This is just, again, our projected record formula. So it's in 2021. The projection was 7-5. The record was 11-1. Obviously, Michigan did much better, coming off of a disappointing 2020. I don't think many people expected them to bounce back and have the type of season that they had. That was a really good year, and that kind of kick-started this 3-year run for the Wolverines. In 2022, projection was 10-2. They went 12-0, so they beat it by 2 games that year. And then in 2023, projection was 11-1. They went 12-0 again. And so in my personal prediction, I did pick Michigan to go undefeated in 2023, and I picked them to win the national championship. So actually, by the way, I've gotten the national champion correct the last 2 years in the preseason. I had Michigan in 23, and I had Ohio State, of course, last year. So 8-4 in 2024 was the projection, and they were actually under that at 7-5. A big part of that was because of the schedule, but the schedule plays into the projection, obviously. So if you look back at the last 4 seasons, 3 of the 4 years they were better than the projection, but last year they were just 1 game below. So I would expect them to probably be close to this projection or do better, again, based off of these numbers. So again, this is the schedule, and this is the scale that we use to do this projection. Games that are in the white, those are going to be your 50-50 games, and this is based off of our tier rankings. So Michigan is in tier 2. So if they play another tier 2 team, obviously that's going to be a 50-50 game. They're in the 40 to 60% range. If they play a team below them, so if they play a tier 3 team, then that will be in the 61 to 70% range. But if that game is on the road, then that becomes a 50-50 game. So that's kind of how it works. Again, just based off of the strength of the schedule, the tiers of all these teams, and then where the games are played. And again, Michigan does have 6 road games against Power 4 opponents. So that will have an impact with this projection. So we'll start with the easier games, pretty much the guaranteed wins. You've got New Mexico, Central Michigan, and Purdue. So as easy as this schedule is, there aren't a whole lot of like cupcake games. There aren't a whole lot of pretty much guaranteed win type games. I'll go ahead and tell you, most teams have more, most tier 1, tier 2 teams have more than 3 games that are pretty much guaranteed wins. And a part of this is you look at Northwestern and Maryland. If those games were at home, those would be in the green. Those would be guaranteed wins pretty much. But because they're on the road, they do drop a little bit. And you'll see they're in the blue. We're talking about Wisconsin, Washington, Northwestern, and Maryland. These are games where Michigan should win. They'll be a clear favorite, but not guaranteed wins. And I do like to sometimes make the comparison with these percentages. It's kind of like looking at the point spreads. The 40 to 60% games are games where the spreads are going to be, 3, 4, 5 points, really low. And then 61 to 70 where it's going to be closer to a touchdown, 7, 8, 9 points. These games in the blue, probably games where the spread is going to be double digits. So I would expect Michigan to be, a two touchdown favorite in most of these games. Maybe Wisconsin, Washington closer to 10. Maybe they're all closer to 10. I don't know, because you got Northwestern and Maryland on the road. But again, this formula is not based off of projecting spreads or anything like that. That's just one way to look at it. But yeah, you've got these 4 games, then you got the 3 pretty easy wins. That only leaves 5 games, 5 somewhat tough games for Michigan, and who knows if these games will even be tough. I don't know how good Michigan State and USC are going to be, even Nebraska. Those are definitely teams that are hard to predict at this point. But yeah, when we come back to the projection, like if you look at 4 games in the blue, yeah, they should win all those games, but the odds would tell us they're going to win 3 out of those 4 games. So keep that in mind when we get to the projection. Projection is going to have them losing one of those games, even though they're going to be a pretty big favorite in all 4. So yeah, you got the games of the purple next. You've got Michigan State. That's the only one. So Michigan State, a couple of tiers below Michigan. So they're a tier 4 team, but because it's on the road, that bumps it up to the purple instead of the blue. It's a rivalry game. Now, that does not go into this formula. We don't really put any human element. Don't really look at rivalries or when the games are played. That will come, of course, when we do predictions. But just looking at, again, the formula and where these teams are in the tiers, that's why this one comes out in the purple. Again, rivalry game on the road. I think Michigan will be favored by about a touchdown. So I think the spread concept does work out pretty well here. And then you've got really 4 games that I would say could go either way. I think there will be a favorite in all 4 games. But I don't know if they're toss-ups, but they're close. They're close to that. Oklahoma, I think Michigan's a better team, but that game's on the road. That'll be tough. Same thing with Nebraska. I think Michigan's going to be a better team than Nebraska, and they are in a tier above Oklahoma, Nebraska, and USC. All these teams are tier 3 teams. Michigan, again, is a tier 2 team, but because those games are on the road, that's why they become 50-50 games. Those are really games that could go either way. And then you've got Ohio State. Ohio State's a tier 1 team, but because Michigan is at home, even though they're a tier behind Ohio State, that makes this a 50-50 game. And of course, if you put in the human element here, there's no way I would put Michigan below the 50-50% range just because of what's happened in this rivalry the last few years. So that leaves 4 games, again, that could go really either way. And then you've got Michigan State. They'll be a decent favorite there. And then 4 games where they should be a pretty big favorite. And then you got the easy wins with New Mexico, Central Michigan, and Purdue. So the math kind of works out. It's kind of easy here. If you've got 4 50-50 games, you're going to split those games. You're going to go 2-2 in those games. And then again, I told you, the odds would say they're going to lose one of these games in the blue, or throw Michigan State in there. They're going to lose one of those 5 games. It's just kind of the way college football works. Michigan, if they have a good season, they should win all those games, and they'll beat this projection. But the projected record is 9-3. So a 9-3 projection for Michigan. A better season than what they had last year, but not quite the playoff type season. Now, again, all they have to do is beat this by 1 game. If they can just get to 10-2, they should be in the college football playoff. And I showed you 3 out of the last 4 years, they have done better than our projected record. So if they can do that, again, by just 1 game, then Michigan is in the college football playoff in 2025. And I think that is definitely a real possibility. I think they do have the schedule. If this Michigan team turns out to be a good team, as good as I think a lot of people expect them to be, this schedule does set up for them to make a run to get back to the college football playoff.